Good evening all and welcome. Tonight, please join me in the cabin for a creepy collection of scary stories. Don't forget to check out Patreon if you would like exclusive content and a birthday shout out. You can find the link in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was younger, around 14, I was invited to go on a camping trip with my best friend Pat, his dad, and his uncles. It was this kind of guys' weekend coming-of-age thing. Something I'd like to do with my kids now. You know, fishing, cooking over fire, our first couple of beers, sleeping in tents, that kind of stuff. We drove pretty far up north. But this many years later, being 30, I can't remember where exactly we went. I knew it was about 2.5 hours north of where I live now. We had parked Pat's dad's truck off the side of the road in a bush and canoeing a pretty far distance down a river to a lake and set up our camp at the edge of the water. Right across the water, we could still see this really old abandoned-looking cabin. On the outside, it looked abandoned. The roof was sagging and all the bushes were growing up around it. At one point, Pat's dad and his uncles were fishing and drinking, and allowed us to go adventuring a bit. Surprisingly, they actually allowed us to take one of the canoes across the water to check out the abandoned cabin. In hindsight, I don't think I would let my boys now go that far where I couldn't get them in an emergency. But they were drunk, and being 13-ish-year-old boys, we did exactly that. We paddled across the water and checked it out. On the outside, this thing looked super decrepit. The front door was unlocked, and we went inside. This was a mistake. On the inside, it was certainly not abandoned and very lived in. It really freaked us out knowing someone lived there, but there was obviously nowhere nearby. There were magazines of undressed people spread across the table. A bong, a full tray of weed, beer bottles everywhere, and on one of the shelves in the living room were 2 hunting shotguns. I know it was dumb to play with them, but we did. Never pulled the trigger, just walked around the house with them like idiots feeling cool. We checked out different rooms in the house, but one really creeped us out. I know this is technically breaking and entering, or trespass, but we honestly thought it was abandoned before we got inside. Once we were in, we figured it was someone's hangout or something, but it was pretty deep out in the woods. Anyway, one of those rooms had those mannequins that you see in clothing stores, but none of them were wearing any clothes, and they all wore wigs of different lengths and colors. Something really felt off about that, and we decided we'd had enough and left after putting the guns back where we'd found them. After canoeing back to our campsite, we told Pat's dad everything. He was almost as stunned as we were. That evening we fished some more, and Pat caught a fish that his dad cooked over the fire. While we were eating dinner, 2 guys came in on a motorboat and stopped at our site. They were friendly enough, we all joked around a bit, and we had assumed they were from just another camp or people out fishing like us. But then they invited us into their cabin just across the water to hang out. Pat's dad politely declined, and then they still lingered, and things started to feel weird. The 2 guys were drinking quite a lot and exchanging odd looks. At one point they even asked Pat and I if the 2 of us would mind hanging out. Pat's dad gave them a stern no, and things got even more awkward. They stayed a while until it got dark and finally left. That night, Pat's dad and uncles stayed up all night by the fire while we were sleeping in the tent. We didn't do much sleeping, mostly just talking about how creeped out we were by those 2 guys that lived in the cabin. Eventually, we fell asleep. In the morning, everything was packed up, and Pat's dad cut the trip short. We put the tent we were in away and left immediately. Most of the trip back was spent talking about how his dad was really freaked out about those guys. Pat and I have talked about it here and there over the years, but years ago we had a major falling out. I never did ask exactly where that cabin was. I wouldn't want to go back there anyway. But to the wig-wearing hermits in the cabin, I hope to never meet you again. I'm a pretty skeptical person when it comes to the paranormal, albeit having a vested interest in tales and evidence. I'm the kind of person who'll browse ghost hunter videos on YouTube and all kinds of subreddits, and I visited plenty of haunted locations. A part of me wants to believe, but is also terrified of the prospect of witnessing something. I was a huge non-believer mostly, until a few months ago. I had wanted to plan a surprise party for my girlfriend's 30th. She had mentioned wanting to go hit the slopes. It was January, so it's still wintertime at this point. I organized this months ahead, and had invited some of her closest friends to join. I ended up renting an Airbnb cabin that had enough rooms to house 10 people or 5 couples. One entire lower basement level with 2 beds, a room on the first floor, and 3 rooms upstairs. Also adding that this cabin was in a beautiful rural neighborhood in Tahoe, with tons of cabins next door, down the street, adjacent, etc. So there's plenty of housing around us. Nothing peculiar about it, and there are other people staying around. Of course, my girlfriend and I take the master bedroom upstairs, and right across the hall is another couple in one room, and my girlfriend's cousin by herself in the 3rd room next door. All rooms are taken, and the middle floor is a lively area with games, a fireplace, and a foosball table. These details are somewhat relevant and important later in the story. The first night was a night of merry drinking and games. To celebrate the occasion, we had decorated the living area and blown up balloons to be loosely strewn around the large cozy living room and family room where we imbibed. Almost uneventful with respect to weird happenings, except towards the end of the night, balloons would randomly pop at odd intervals, which isn't so odd in of itself. Some of our groups suggested that the balloons were getting attracted towards the heater vents and popping. I was dismissive of this, but not all of them were near vents. It was enough to raise an eyebrow, but not a red flag. At around 2 a.m., after everyone had gone to bed and the house was dead quiet, we kept hearing isolated pops echoing from downstairs, not constant but enough to be unsettling in the dark. We still chalked it up to temperature changes or bad balloons, and no one made a big deal of it the next morning. The next night, after a long day out on the mountain, we were all pretty beat and went to bed earlier, around 11:30 or so. I remember it being noticeably colder, and since I couldn't sleep, I decided to go down to adjust the thermostat, and this is when things started getting weird. As I stepped into the dark hallway, I saw the door across the hall, our couple friends' room, was slightly ajar. Their lights were still on, and I could hear the bathroom running, so I assumed one of them was still up. I quietly made my way down the creaky stairs. Nothing unusual there, but halfway down I heard the floorboards creak behind me, as if someone were following me just a few steps behind. I figured it was one of our friends also heading to the kitchen to grab water. When I reached the thermostat and turned to say something, no one was there though. The house was dark and still. No one at the kitchen, no footsteps, just me. Suddenly I was very aware of how alone I was. I'd always read about that feeling, that visceral, spine-prickling sensation of being watched, and in that moment I finally understood it. I quickly adjusted the temperature and went back upstairs without a word. Half-hour later, still cold, I decided to go back down and bump up the heat a bit more. This time I turned on the upstairs hallway light to give myself a little more comfort. As I made my way back to the thermostat, I started mentally reviewing what had happened earlier. The phantom footsteps, the silence, the unease, and from across the room near the foosball table and fire pit, I clearly heard the plastic foosball roll across the surface and hit the side of the table. It wasn't a house creak, it wasn't the wind, it was a deliberately made sound. It took everything in me not to bolt up the stairs like a scared kid, but I definitely didn't linger. I got back to bed and laid there, eyes wide for a long time, trying to rationalize everything, but I didn't tell anyone. The next morning, as we were packing up and loading the cars, one of our friends, the same couple that stayed across the hall, casually brought up the balloon popping from the first night. I took it as a cue and shared what I had experienced. That's when her expression changed immediately. She looked at me dead serious and said, "You're not going to believe this." She told me that the previous night, sometime after everyone had gone to bed, she was lying awake when she saw a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. At first she thought she was dreaming, then she blinked, and it was still there. She panicked and shook her boyfriend awake, but the figure vanished the moment he moved. I was floored. That same night I thought he had followed me down the stairs because I had heard someone behind me. Her story felt like confirmation. Then my girlfriend's cousin chimed in saying she'd heard strange breathing sounds in her room, but wrote it off as the house settling or pipes shifting. No one had said a word until that moment. On their own, maybe the balloons, the creaking floorboards, and the rolling foosball could be explained away. Maybe. But it all happened across 2 nights, alongside independent experiences from multiple people, which makes it harder to dismiss. I don't know what was in that cabin. Maybe it was residual energy, maybe it was something that just didn't want to be noticed. But I know what I heard, and I know I wasn't the only one. I attended a small Christian school with fewer than 100 students across 10 year levels. For our annual school camp, years 4 to 6 went to Berry Sports and Recreation Center for 2 nights. I was excited but nervous. This was 4 hours from home, and I had never been away from my mum without an older relative. Thankfully, my sister, just a year older than me, was also attending. When we arrived and unpacked, I felt an unfamiliar sensation in my chest. After lunch, we socialized with students from other schools. That evening after dinner and night games, we returned to our cabins, which were more secluded than the other students' accommodations. All the girls in my cabin talked about how the place felt eerie. When the lights went out, I saw a tall shadow in the doorway. Terrified, I moved to another girl's bed in the next section, and eventually I fell asleep, until I awoke to the sound of a woman's voice calling for Max and Luke, reassuring them it was safe to come home. I barely slept after that. The next night, we left our cabin tidy before heading to the gym for night games. When we returned, everything was trashed. Items thrown around, lights on, nothing as we left it. Suddenly, screams ran out that it was a demon, followed by crying. Teachers rushed in to console us, but no one slept that night. On the bus ride home, I was filled with fear and curiosity. What had we encountered? Even weeks later, I felt uneasy. Then small things started happening at home. A door rattling with no draft, footsteps when no one was awake, and soon it escalated. My family, believers and skeptics alike, witnessed unexplainable events. We heard children running up and down the stairs, and twice a clock jumped off the wall at my mother. My guitar strummed itself, but the worst part, whatever it was, it focused on me. My bedroom was downstairs near the front door. I heard tapping on the windows, scratching on the walls, footsteps on the gravel outside where no one could have been. Banging on the front door would wake me in the middle of the night, but the sleep paralysis was the worst. I woke up between 3 to 4 a.m. every night, unable to move, often feeling a presence sitting on my bed. One morning, I found my door unlocked and wide open, though I hadn't touched it. When I turned 11, we moved. Everything seemed fine at first, but in our new home, strange things persisted. My sister's bathroom was connected to my room. I would see one of them enter but never leave. I heard the shower run, but no one would be in there. And when I asked why they had left the water running, everyone would claim they hadn't even been in there. After moving again, all activity ceased. Years later, curiosity led me to research Bury Sportham Wreck. What I found was shocking. It had once been a home for misbehaved boys, where they were beaten, some possibly to death. And my cabin, the very place I had slept, had been allocated as the punishment room. Others who visited reported similar, terrifying experiences. I still wonder why I formed an attachment and what it wanted from me, but it explains my lifelong fascination with the paranormal. I was living out in a tiny cabin out in the woods, working remotely off my laptop. This was in a small town with about 200 people. The kind where if something scary happens, everyone knows or pretends not to. My cabin was tucked back near the highway, but still surrounded by forest. It was peaceful and quiet. I take my dog on walks through the trails daily. One afternoon, I heard 2 gunshots nearby. I didn't think much of it at the time. It's hunting county, lots of redneck energy. Noise like that wasn't unusual. A day or 2 later, a truck pulls up. Strange because I don't know anyone in town, and no one ever comes out this way. A guy rolls down the window and calls me over, says he's my neighbor, though his place is 500 meters away at least, and completely out of sight, and asks if I heard the gunshots. I said I did. Then he tells me it was his neighbor shooting at his house over some land dispute. Doesn't ask me to be a witness or anything, just wanted to know if I had heard it, which already felt off. I'd never met the guy before, and something about the whole interaction gave me a bad vibe. Then he sees my dog digging around somewhere unimportant, and suddenly starts trying to correct her, steps out, calls her over, and without asking grabs her, and tries to do this weird-ass Caesar Milan alpha role dominance thing. She yelps. I tell him to stop and he backs off. He says he's a great dog trainer. Then, I'll never forget how creepy this was. He asks if I have any firearms. I say no. He nods and goes, "You should come over sometime and mow my lawn. Please ensure you bring Laika." My dog? Like, who says that? The phrasing, the tone. My gut at this point was screaming. He leaves not long after, and I'm standing there thinking, did I just tell this dude I'm unarmed? What if he was the one who fired those shots? Or worse, what if he killed someone and was trying to figure out who might have heard? None of it sat right with me. Then he kept showing up, calling, texting, and asking why I hadn't come over yet. Getting weird. I'd already given him my number before I realized how strange he was, which was a rookie mistake. Eventually, I talked to some folks at the local store. They're like, "Oh yeah, that guy." Turns out he's a full-blown alcoholic. Lost his job, lost his wife, and apparently had a very bad reputation in the valley. Everyone avoids him. The exact kind of unhinged loner you don't want knowing where you sleep. From that point on, I had a lot of trouble sleeping properly. It was a remote cabin with no one nearby, surrounded by trees. Too many blind spots. I had nothing but a knife and a can of bear spray, and the guy knew that. One night, dead quiet outside, and my dog starts to growl, low at first, then more persistent. I didn't hear anything, but I didn't need to. Every room in the cabin had a window except the bathroom. So I grabbed the knife and spray and locked myself in that tiny room and simply listened. I must have been there for hours. I think eventually I fell asleep on the floor. Never felt dread like that before. It's the kind when you're picturing someone silently creeping through the woods with a shotgun, just waiting. Eventually I moved. But no joke, the landlords at the next place were also creepy as hell. They had 3 dogs already and started trying to steal mine. I heard them plotting about how they had become the in crowd, so she'd prefer them. Started sneakily feeding her when they thought I wasn't looking. Insane behavior. That was it. One morning I went to the market and I packed everything into my uninsured van. No license, dog in the passenger seat, and simply left with no notice. Straight up bailed and never looked back. It felt like the hills had eyes out there. Some rural places just have that energy. You know, just like something's off all the time. But normally you don't realize it until you're way too deep in, because of the beauty of nature itself. This happened to my family 2 summers ago, and none of us can stop thinking about it. Even now, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. We're a big family, 8 in total, spanning a range of ages. It was the summer of 22, and we had rented this cabin in rural North Carolina. Supposedly the perfect getaway, quiet, remote, and tucked into the side of a mountain, with acres of woods on all sides, and no neighbors in sight. No phone service either, just the kind of place you go when you want to unplug completely. At least that was the idea. From the moment we got there though, something felt wrong. It wasn't anything obvious, not at first, but every one of us, separately, mentioned the same thing that first day. That weird feeling like we were being watched. You'd be walking from one end of the house to the other, and suddenly it felt like someone was behind you. Not exactly following, but observing. That first night we tried to shake it off. Most of the adults and older kids had a few drinks, and were just enjoying the mountain air. Some of us were at picnic tables and the rest out back in the hot tub. It must have been around 10 to 10:30 p.m. when it happened. From somewhere deep in the trees behind the cabin we heard a voice, a woman's, clear, confident and casual. It said, "Marco." Just like the game, like when we were kids at a party. There was a weird silence after, a pause where everyone was just trying to take in what was said. And then before anyone could really think about it, my sister-in-law, laughing like it was no big deal, called back, "Holo!" We all froze. It was like the alcohol drained straight from our blood, and I remember looking across the yard and making eye contact with my stepsister. We both had the exact same wide-eyed look on our faces. Neither of us were particularly drunk, and we knew instantly no one else was out there. There's no reason we should have heard that voice. The place was off-grid, with no cell service and no cars driving nearby, not even any houses in the vicinity. My dad, who was pretty buzzed, tried to laugh it off like it was nothing, but even he looked shaken. The sound didn't come from up the road or from the porch or anything like that. It came from the woods, from the pitch-black trees where you couldn't see more than 10 feet in. Needless to say, we immediately went inside. Someone locked the door, and I think everyone was pretending not to be as freaked out as we were, but the energy had changed completely. What had been a fun, relaxing evening turned into everyone sitting in the living room, quiet, eyes darting towards the windows, and that was just the beginning. We stayed the full week, but I wish we hadn't. The next day, the goats stopped coming to us. The cabin was on a small farm-like property that had a few goats wandering around freely. When we arrived, they were curious and friendly, nudging our hands, following us along the fence line. But after that night, they avoided us. They started pacing near the edges of the woods, especially in the evenings, and we'd hear them screaming, not bleating, screaming, like something was scaring them or hurting them. It would happen randomly, usually in the middle of the night, and it was this shrill, panicked sound that would jolt you straight out of your sleep. At first we thought perhaps it was a predator, but there was no sign of injury or blood or missing goats. Just that horrible, frantic screaming echoing across the mountainside. And then there were the knocks, always late at night, and always from the walls that faced the woods. Soft at first, a few light taps like someone knocking at the front door, but from the back wall of the living room, There was nothing but grass and trees. Later in the week they got louder, a solid thud, like a fist or something bigger was hitting the siding just once. Then silence. We'd go outside with our flashlights and check around the perimeter, but we'd never see anything. The ground was too hard and dry to hold prints. I didn't sleep more than 3 hours a night the entire trip. Even during the day, things didn't feel right. The woods were silent, no birdsong, no insects. Just this weird static hum in the air, like a pressure headache that never really let up. Any time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched from just inside the tree line. I couldn't shake it. We all had our theories. Some brought up skinwalkers. Someone else said maybe a spirit or some kind of mountain entity. My brother joked about it being a prank from another camper, but there were no signs anyone had ever been out there beside us. I grew up in a semi-rural area, and I know what animals sound like. This wasn't a fox or coyote, and the voice from the woods wasn't human. It was clear and calculating, like it was playing with us. We left after our scheduled week. No one said anything out loud, but I think we were all afraid to leave early, like it would have angered whatever it was. When we finally pulled out of the long gravel driveway, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. That night after we got home, hundreds of miles away, I couldn't sleep. And around 2 a.m. I heard someone knock on the wall outside my bedroom. Just once. I told myself it was nothing, maybe paranoia, maybe a dream. But I haven't gone back to the mountains since. And my sister-in-law never says polo anymore. Not even as a joke. One year, my mother took us kids to a state park for summer vacation. She wasn't into going camping, so she rented a family cabin at the park. The cabin was picturesque, with native stone walls topped by brown plank trim, and it featured a small bedroom, a kitchen, bathroom, and had 2 couches in the living room. One of the couches was a hide-a-bed, the other was not. A wall plaque informed us that the park cabins had been built by the WPA in the 1930s. We had arrived in the late afternoon and began unloading the car for our 3-day stay. I was to hang our clothes in the tiny closet, and as soon as I opened the closet door, I got a bad case of creepy chills. Though the west-facing cabin door was open and sunshine was streaming into the room, not one ray of light penetrated into the closet. It was like the lights just stopped when it struck the open closet door. The wood trim, along with the opening, gleamed in the mellow light, but the interior was pitch black. I couldn't find the rod to hang the clothes on. I didn't want to enter the closet to feel for the rod, and there didn't seem to be a closet light. Mum brought the flashlight. Batteries must be low. We could dimly see the clothes rack. My sister 13 and I 11 would sleep on the pull-out couch. Little brother at 18 months would get the other couch, and Mum would sleep in the small bedroom. After unpacking, we hurried outside to enjoy the mountain scenery while it was still light. That night, Mum left the bathroom light on, with the door nearly closed. This made a dim nightlight in a strange place, except for the closet next to the bathroom. We had all been asleep for a while when I woke up without knowing why. Something wasn't right. I hadn't been aware of hearing anything, but something wasn't right. I studied the room carefully. Nothing. I panned across the room again, and that's when I saw a very tall man leaning forwards over my little brother on the opposite couch. The man was wearing a tan trench coat, like the old Humphrey Bogart movies, and a 1940s-era brown hat. His back to me, and he appeared to be studying the sleeping child. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Little brother's eyes opened and he looked up at the man and began screaming bloody murder. The man just faded out. He didn't leave. but was just gone. Now Mum's up. All the lights are on, brother's still screaming and won't settle down. Sister sits up, rubbing her eyes groggily. What's going on? Meanwhile, I'm yelling hysterically. There was a man in here. Mum checks the exit door next to brother's couch, but it's locked. She grabs a skillet from the kitchen and checks the bathroom, the closet, goes back for the flashlight because it's dark in the closet, but there's nothing. Sister gets up and grabs little brother. He begins to calm down, but he's clutching her neck so hard it hurts. A thorough rehashing of events didn't lead to any conclusions. My sister insisted that I had had a nightmare. I countered, what about brother? Did he have one too? But Mother didn't have much to say, mostly just looked thoughtful. She'd never allowed us to watch ghost or monster movies for fear that it would give us nightmares. Finally, she said we should all go back to bed and talk about it in the morning. She tried to put brother back down on the couch, but he kicked and cried so much, she wound up taking him to bed with her. She left the kitchen light on this time, and we finally got back to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, Mum explained a little about ghosts and how this might be one. She said ghosts were lost or confused souls who couldn't actually hurt us. Then after our day's activities, we would pray for the ghosts and it should go away. But it didn't. After our prayer session, Mum left the bathroom light on and the door open, just in case. I wanted to go home. Brother still couldn't stand the sight of the couch. Sister resented the fuss because her sunburn was bothering her, and brother was to sleep with us on the pullout. I thought I'd never get to sleep, but finally did. Again, suddenly, I'm wide awake. I look around and don't see anything at first, but there he is, emerging from the closed closet door and walking slowly across the kitchen. Again, I can only see him from behind. In spite of the nightlight, the closet area is still shadowed. He disappears into the little bedroom where Mum is sleeping, and I want to call out a warning but was frozen with fear. A minute passes, then another, and a crashing sound from the bedroom. My mother's voice, loud and commanding, "Out, get out!" Lights on. Rerun of the last night. Mum said she woke up to see the man standing at the foot of her bed. As her eyes travelled from the belt of his trench coat, the figure seemed to solidify. Details became sharper. She looked at his face. There wasn't one. An automotive coil shock absorber emerged from the neck of the trench coat and disappeared into the fedora hat. It raised its arms like a Bela Lugosi monster or a priest giving a blessing and began falling forwards onto the bed. Right before it hit the bed, it disappeared. The crashing sound came from Mum knocking her water glass and the bedside lamp to the floor when she went for the light. Mum agreed that we should cut the vacation short and leave as soon as it was possible, even though she doubted the park would refund the unused day of the cabin's rent. Trust her to worry about that. My sister had to fetch our clothes from the closet, as I flatly refused to go near it. She had to use the flashlight. Many years later, I relocated to a town not too far from the park. Lots of locals frequent the park, but of course don't rent cabins there. I haven't found anyone yet who has heard of the ghost in Cabin 7. This happened last summer in northern Michigan, deep in the woods at a rental cabin with no neighbors. It was me and 5 of my girlfriends, a weekend getaway just to disconnect and relax. The cabin was about 30 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by forest and tall grass on either side. There was hardly any cell service, just us, some wine, a fire pit, and it was perfect. It was our second night there. We'd been joking around the campfire, being loud, laughing over drinks, and sharing stories. At one point, one of the girls pulled out her tarot deck, and we did some casual readings, not taking it too seriously, more for fun than anything. But about 10 minutes later, something happened. It was 11:30, and out of nowhere, just above the din of our noise, this laugh cut through the air, sharp and piercing, so loud it stopped all of us mid-sentence. We froze. It was no animal, and it wasn't a person. It was a child, or at least sounded like one. But it wasn't right. It had this high-pitched, almost gleeful, malicious children's laugh, like something pretending to be a kid but didn't quite get it right. Two of the girls said it sounded like a mixture of laughter and crying, like something in pain trying to sound cheerful. Another friend said it gave her a mental image of a child laughing while walking into a fire. All 6 of us heard it. Every one of us described it differently, but every version was horrifying. And it lasted too long. A full 6 seconds, not an echo, not a quick sound in the distance. It was right there in the woods behind the fire pit, louder than us. It was as if it wanted to make sure we heard it. We stared at each other, wide-eyed, and without saying a word, all got up at once and bolted for the cabin. As we were grabbing our stuff and running, I heard rustling in the grass just off to the side. Not heavy like deer, but closer, faster, smaller and quicker. I swear I felt eyes on me, close enough to touch, like whatever made that sound was just behind the grass line watching. We locked ourselves inside and didn't sleep that night. We tried to rationalize it. Was it an animal? A prank? But there's no way. There were no neighbors and no kids for miles. No one knew where we were. The cabin didn't even have an exact address on Google Maps. We talked about it so many times since then, and none of us can explain it. The timing freaks us out the most. It was right after the tarot reading. We weren't supposed to summon anything, but it felt like something noticed us. In the later hours of a family reunion, long after the last burgers had been grilled, and the kids settled down with a flashlight and marshmallows, things started to get quiet. This was in my grandparents' hunting cabin, sat deep in the woods, with no cell service and no streetlight. It was around 11 p.m. A few of us were still outside, standing near the fire pit in the front of the cabin. Most of the adults had wandered inside to play cards or drink coffee at the long, wooden table near the windows. My brother and I lingered behind, poking the embers with sticks, enjoying the quiet. That's when we saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, just between 2 parked cars at the edge of the gravel driveway, something moved. A solid bar of green light, neither glowing nor flickering. It was a smooth horizontal line, maybe 3 feet off the ground, about a foot long, like a thin neon tube. And it was moving at a steady, eerily slow pace, no more than 1 mile an hour, like it had no rush. My brother saw the same thing I did. We both stood up, eyes locked on it. And it didn't bob or sway. It didn't stutter like a flashlight beam. It just glided calmly between the cars, casting the faintest green tint onto the bumpers. Then it moved behind the cabin. Bear in mind it was completely silent while doing so. We looked at each other, and without speaking began to follow it. Around the back of the cabin, the firelight faded and the darkness grew thicker, but the light was still there floating ahead of us. It passed by the edge of the woods, kept the same speed, and we didn't get closer, but it didn't get away either. Then it just vanished. It didn't blink, it didn't fade out. It was simply gone, like someone had flipped a switch and simply deleted it from this world. We stood there in the darkness for a long moment, and my brother said, "You saw it too, right?" I nodded. We went back inside after that, even quieter than before. We didn't mention it to anyone right away. Maybe we were scared they wouldn't believe us, or worse, that someone would believe us and confirm we'd seen something we weren't meant to. Over the years, we've brought it up from time to time. Neither of us can explain it. We've Googled every combination of green light woods, floating bar, and hunting cabin you can think of, but nothing has ever matched that. To this day, it's the strangest thing I have ever witnessed. And there have been occasions when we've gone back to the cabin, and late at night, I found myself staring out into the trees and the darkness, just to keep an eye open, seeing if it will ever come back. This happened in the winter of 2021. Me, my brother, my mother and niece were at my mum's cabin in northern Canada, working on cleaning up, chopping wood, and moving junk. As we were packing up, we were getting ready to head home. My mother and niece were already in the truck, as my brother and I were throwing stuff in the back. Neither of us said anything, but from the other side of the truck bed, my brother turned around with confusion all over his face and said, "What?" I stared at him and asked what he was talking about. He looked over my shoulder behind me, and as he looked at me, he said he just heard our dad call my name. And just as he said that, I felt something watching from behind me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked towards where he heard it, and it was pitch black behind the cabin. I hurried him to hop in the truck and told our mum to drive home and hurry. The weird thing is I didn't hear anything, only he did. So whatever it was calling out to him only. And again, my dad has a very specific way of calling my brother's name, because it's very hard for regular people to pronounce it. But he was in Brazil, visiting family and getting treatment. So whatever it was, perfectly mimicked my dad. It creeps me out to this day, just thinking about it. I grew up in the sticks, and we had a kind of unofficial agreement with the local farmers that we could use the woods at the edge of their field as long as we respected the land. So we did, building forts, carving trails, setting up tree swings. It was our whole world. One summer, my brothers and I, me at 8, them at 13 and 16 respectively, decided to take up a notch and build a proper treehouse. It took us a week to finish. Nothing fancy, but it was solid, about 15 feet off the ground, with a ladder, a little roof, and even a railing. It felt like a castle to us. To celebrate finishing it, we camped out that night. We made a fire on the ground below, grilled some hot dogs, and hung out until the fire burned low. Then we climbed into our new hideout. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange metallic clunk, and then a low scratching sound. I sat up and froze, as did my brothers. Something was down there. Then more scratching and more growling. We scrambled to grab our flashlights, leaned over the railing and shined them down towards the ground. 6 coyotes. Not the scrawny ones that you usually see darting across fields. These were huge, like wolves nearly, thick fur, tall shoulders, glowing eyes in the beams of our flashlight. They were circling the fire pit, then pouring the ATV trailer we left at the bottom of the tree. They were sniffing, scratching. Occasionally one would sit up and stare at us silently. We didn't have phones. We couldn't call for help. Couldn't yell loud enough for anyone to hear, and no way in hell were we going down that ladder. So we sat there all night, watching them watch us. They didn't leave until the sky began to turn grey. Only then, one by one, they drifted off into the woods like shadows slipping between the trees. As soon as we were sure they were gone, we bolted, climbed down, hopped on the ATVs and tore through the trails back home like our lives depended on it. And I swear we didn't breathe until we made it to our front yard. We thought we knew those woods, thought we owned them in our own childish way. But that night reminded us that we were simply guests, and they were the real occupants. And we weren't always welcome. Back in my early teens, living near the little coastal town of Brandon, there was one early morning where my family and I were woken up by our border collie going off. We all went outside to see what was up, my parents and older siblings being the first to exit the house. We all saw what seemed to be a bobcat or something dart across the top of the driveway and disappear into the trees across the road, and that ultimately led to them dismissing what led to our dog barking. Everyone went back inside, but I lingered for an extra minute as the sun was rising. Something just kind of seemed strange to me. Looking back on it now, I think maybe it was just too quiet, even with that bobcat or whatever being around. And I mean our dog, she was usually rather docile. I don't think I'd ever heard her bark like that. It was after a minute or two that I heard this bone-chilling noise. It was a short, raspy gasp, like someone choking on air. Outside it was very loud, but from what I could tell, none of my family heard it inside. It was coming from this abandoned, small in-law cabin that was in a little patch of trees near the house, which was kind of falling apart, had rats living in it, and we used to store our garbage until we took it to the dump. I never liked going near that thing before or after this incident. It always gave me the creeps. I wonder now if maybe there were more than rats living there, but this is the only event that I can recall where I heard anything strange or our dog acting in that way. Anyway, I heard these gasps a few times before running back inside, and while I tried to match it to any sort of animal or wild animal in the area, it just didn't. To this day I can still vividly recall the sound, and after all that time I've come to believe it was the rake based on others' experiences. About a month ago, I went with 8 of my friends to a cabin that belongs to one of the friends that came along. It's placed right on the shore of a big river. We only spent 2 nights there. On the last night, we were all sitting on the dock. That's more like a platform because it's surrounded by a fence, and it's not used for boats, only for sitting around like we were. And we were having the usual night talks. Must have been around 4 a.m. Then suddenly, I heard a weird sound, and I told them to stay quiet and listen. We shut up, and all heard a melody that seemed like the kind of song you hear from a music box. The song lasted for less than 10 seconds and vanished into the silence of the night. We all started to freak out and question what the hell did we just witness. We were alone in the cabin, and there were no other houses nearby. We spent the rest of the night sitting together on the dock talking about paranormal stuff and coming up with theories. What's weird about the song is that the sound seemed to be coming from everywhere, and it also seemed to be very near. The next day when we woke up, the friend that had the cabin told us a bit about the history of the house and about his grandparents, that they had built it, and apparently his grandpa gave his wife, my friend's grandma, a music box when they were young, but he wasn't sure if it was actually true. The whole place was quite creepy. A lot of weird dolls were in every room, but I brushed it off in the beginning because the cabin was old. If we didn't have to leave that day, and our train wasn't that early, we would have investigated more by going to the villages or hour and a half away by foot and asking the locals about any similar stories. So I asked my friend to tell me more about the history of the cabin later, and this is what I found out. In the region where the cabin is located about 50 years ago, some tunnels were built, and some of the workers perished in the process. My friend's grandparents, who were of course young at the time, decided to pay tribute to those who had died by putting a cross on the mountains that are around there, with the help of a few other people. The cross was right in front of the deck we were sitting on, and on the other side of the river. My friend unfortunately can't ask his grandparents because they don't live where we do, and he doesn't want to ask this over the phone. But nonetheless, he found it very creepy. I would like to say firstly that I was born very early on, and my great-grandparents were in their 80s. My great-great-grandpa was alive for a bit after I was born, until he died at the ripe old age of 109, and after a few months. But either way, here's the story. Sometime in 99, my great-grandpa owned a horse farm, or did. There's nothing there now but raccoons, dead squirrels, bones, and some really nice Chevys he kept under a tarp. I was 14 and was known to hallucinate, but either way the trip to the forest with my cousins was weird. This giant oak tree my grandparents used to have a tree stand for hunting in, at something like 8 feet up. I shot my first buck there. When I looked at the tree, the stand was in a different position, one that didn't make sense to put it in. I would like to say that was the first sign of my mind saying something was off. After an hour of being kids in the woods talking about what's next for rock and predicting rock stuff in general, I heard a door open and slam shut. I will say that the only nearby house that a noise might have come from was a clearly abandoned cabin that was very old. I was told it was used by my great-great-grandpa for woodcutting and butchering. I was also told by my uncle that if I ever heard a noise out there like a door was shut or broken glass, if you ain't gone in a minute, your heart would be handed to you. But being the dumb, arrogant 14-year-old I was, I turned right towards the cabin and looked for any sign of irregular activity in the house from the outside, in case Hannibal Lecter was sitting there starting to eat my grandma. My heart raced. My cousins ditched me, so whatever I say according to my parents actually never happened, and it was just my kid brain making up stories. But inside I heard crying, female, not a kid, but not an older woman either. She stabbed herself, I could see her. I heard her constantly murmuring about someone. I thought about ditching, but this was someone deranged and quite serious. I ran into the shack, but see no one. I thought this was a hallucination, but then I remembered that my cousins heard it too. My grandmother passed away when I was in 7th grade, and my grandfather passed away my junior year of high school. My uncle also passed away in the same house. Now, my grandmother and grandfather both ended up getting cancer, which was the reason they passed. They were both nearly 80, so there's nothing spooky about that. My uncle, however, was a drug addict, and he died from an overdose. There was nothing paranormal there. He struggled for years. Their house was never haunted. I never noticed weird things happening or anything of the sort, but after my grandfather passed, things got pretty strange. We were packing up my grandfather's log cabin and getting some of his belongings together before we headed back home to where we lived. This cabin was pretty remote, with the only neighbor being about a mile down a gravel road. Well, all of a sudden, I hear my mum wail from the hall bathroom, the one that my grandfather used to use, as he refused to use the one that he and my grandmother shared after he passed. She sounded like she was terrified. I ran into the bathroom to find her sobbing and pointing at the wall. The clock was stuck at 5:45, and this wasn't a digital clock, it was a wall clock, and it was still ticking. I immediately went and looked at all the other clocks in the house. There were at least 4, and they had all stopped at 5:45, but were still ticking. We then smelt a very strong odor of cigarette smoke, as both my grandfather and uncle smoked. It freaked us out so badly, we pretty much left immediately. My mum did take the wall clock she first saw, however, and it remained at 5:45, still ticking, until the battery died a few months later. Has anyone else had this happen to them? It still gives me chills to this day. And in case it wasn't obvious, my grandfather passed away at exactly 5:45 a.m. Have you guys ever heard of the movie The Ring? It was made in around 2002, I think. This is relevant to this story, so hear me out. So, part of the plot of The Ring is that there's this girl who died a long time ago, but her soul can't rest. And she comes back and climbs out of a TV. You might recognize her. She wears a long white gown, that's filthy and stained in all kinds of places and has long dark hair that covers her face. It's quite a frightening movie. So this happened shortly after the movie had been released on DVD. Must have been around late 2002, early 2003. But the point is, me and my friend had all watched it, had agreed to go camping and hiking together. But camping didn't really quite work out, and it ended up being more practical to rent a cabin and go on various hikes from within the cabin. Now, one thing that I need to mention is that one person's significant other at the time was coming to meet us later because they had to work Saturday morning and wouldn't be able to make it until Saturday evening, which was cool. The cabin had around 3 small bedrooms, which was more than enough room for us. On Friday evening, we all got together and were chatting about the movie, because we were in a creepy cabin in the middle of the woods, which is one of the locations in the film. We were all having a laugh when someone gets out an old VHS tape and says, "Oh, look at this. It might have a curse on it." And we all start laughing, and the tape is left on the side and not spoken about very much. The next day, we go out and go for a nice long walk, eat on the way and come back. It was a fantastic hike that left us all absolutely exhausted. We start a fire outside, begin cooking some hot dogs, open a few beers, and have a very pleasant evening. Now, as you may have noticed, it was time for our friend's significant other to come and join us. Someone actually asked if they were going to be coming, and my friend said that she hadn't confirmed yet and that it would probably be in the night. None of us were too concerned, and as we were all exhausted, started making preparations to go to sleep. I fell asleep in my room at around 11 p.m. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard something really creepy. I'm not sure who had opened my bedroom door, but it was open, and seeing as my room was closest to the living area, I felt it my duty to probably investigate. So I get up out of bed extremely groggy and waddle my way over to the TV where the static is playing. It's the only light source in the room, so I switch off the TV and look around, trying to see if there's anyone else about. I didn't want to call out because I didn't want to wake everyone up, but I squint into the darkness, and there, coming from the kitchen area, do I see what appears to be a shadow looking at me from the doorframe. I squint further, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me or not, and I slowly start to retreat when the figure pulls out of the kitchen doorframe, and I see someone with long dark hair falling in front of their face, wearing a white dirty gown and barefoot, start to approach me very eerily from the darkness. I just about drop a brick. People talk about fight or flight, but in that moment all I could do was freeze. I stand there as this thing comes ever closer, and with no warning whatsoever, it starts to run at me. I let out a scream, and just as I do, someone flicks the light on, and everyone starts to laugh. Turns out, as I had been the first one to go to bed, and the wife had arrived with this ingenious prank idea, they had decided that I would be the victim of this ring prank. I didn't find it very funny at first, but eventually I started laughing too. It was very well executed, and I honestly did enjoy it in hindsight. But all the same, those moments of pure, unreal fear were probably some of the most frightening in my entire life. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's collection of creepy cabin stories. Hear that alliteration, doesn't it sound beautiful? And if you would like your story read, you can email me or post it on our Reddit forum. Links can be found in the description. I do enjoy reading your stories. Any viewers from Canada, please try and get your stories to me, because I am trying to do a video with all the provinces and territories in Canada. That would be pretty fun. So if I can get them, I think it would be really good. I look forward to hearing from you, I hope. But that's it from me. Stay awesome. Hopefully watch some more content on screen now, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.